Hello and welcome back to the report. Egypt's top cleric, Grand Mufti Shawki Allam, has condemned the Islamic State, now controlling large sections of Syria and Iraq. He says that it poses a danger to Islam and to Muslims, as well as to others. So how much is the group's advance affecting the global perception of the Caliphate? And are British Muslims fearful of talking about the Islamic State? Yasmin Khatun has more.
This morning, Saudi Arabia announced donations to the United Nations to combat what it called an evil that affects all of us. This came as Egypt's most prominent scholar denounced Islamic State. As cross-border alliances emerge, the Pope has called on Muslims around the world to renounce IS, as there is apprehension on where Muslims stand. The masjid behind me here was afraid that by standing here and talking about this issue, somehow they would fall into contentious ground. But why are we so afraid of discussing this topic, and is the narrative changing? The BBC released a video today where they spoke to a range of young Muslims to ask about the Caliphate and what an Islamic State means. I was asked to partake in that discussion. If you go to a country where there is a majority Muslim and the leader is Muslim, which is, of course, if the majority is like that, this is the inclination that we're going to see, the people there are going to want to establish rule by Islam, because this is going to be their inherent belief. And why should they not? You know, and it's not something that we should be afraid of. I think we often describe the Caliphate and the Khilafah as something really, really scary. But in actuality, it's just, if you're looking at the Islamic State, and then in its bigger group, a cluster of countries which share vested interests, which want to go by the similar principles or the same principles, why should they not work together and have a unified leader? IS have been condemned by many as an extremist group using violence to pursue their objectives. Last week, the Pope called upon Muslim leaders around the world to condemn the actions of the group.
Donne sequestrate, persone massacrate, violenze di ogni tipo, distruzione dappertutto, distruzione di case, di patrimoni religiosi, storici e culturali. Tutto questo offende gravemente Dio e offende gravemente l'umanità.
Egyptian Grand Mufti Shawki Allam, considered the North African nation's highest religious authority, said on state news that the group poses a danger to Islam and Muslims, tarnishing its image as well as shedding blood and spreading corruption. Scholars in Britain and abroad have questioned the legitimacy and actions of the Islamic State, and Saudi Arabia announced today its $100 million donation to the United Nations to combat what it calls terrorism.
I want to thank most sincerely to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the custodian of the two holy mosques, His Majesty King Abdullah bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, for this generous donation of $100 million for the United Nations Counter-Terrorism Center.
IS, standing for Islamic State, formerly known as ISIS, began post the Iraq War, countering the efforts of American forces in the country. 2 years into the civil war in Syria, they established themselves as one of the most powerful factions in the region. In the process, they gained many enemies, including allied rebel forces who they began to fight. Much land acquired by ISIS was taken from rebel forces. On the 1st of Ramadan this year, IS declared an Islamic Caliphate, and airstrikes on Islamic State-held territory began over the weekend. They've caused a shift in alliances and cooperation between those who on other grounds may be deemed enemies. For some, now any call or conversation on an Islamic State brings to question IS and their stance. Are the actions of IS damaging the perception of an Islamic State, or are they representative of what an Islamic State would entail? The media portrayal of IS has served to further orientalize and distance Islamic rule from a form of functioning governance, and polls have revealed that Britons feel threatened by what is taking place. With the increased media coverage and continual rhetoric, is this causing British Muslims to be further polarised and marginalised in practising their faith and putting further pressure on the community? Yasmin Khatoon, The Report, Islam Channel.
Well, in the studio to discuss all this with me are Tala Ahmed, Chair of the Muslim Council of Britain, Dr. Salman Butt of the magazine Islam 21C, and on Skype we're joined by Bilal Abdul Karim, who's a journalist and documentary filmmaker. Tala, you know, if Islamophobes wanted to create a demonisation of the Muslim community, they'd come up with something looking like the Islamic State, wouldn't they?
Yeah, firstly, if I can correct, I'm not the chair of Muslim Council of Britain. In fact, there is no chair. I chair the membership committee. But I think the problem we have is this. Islamic State, as we speak of in the context of Iraq, is a noun, name of a group of people who imposed a kind of rule, whereas Islamic State, Islamically speaking, obviously has is a concept. And the difficulty we have is that the media coverage is not always in fact, most of the time, is not clear whether they're talking about the Islamic State as a concept per se, or are they talking about this specific group of people. And so this is clearly capable of giving people, in fact not capable, this is clearly giving people the wrong perception. Now I think let's be very clear, we heard reports of this group that has taken over a significant portion of Iraq and Syria, that they have destroyed historic places, places of heritage. There are reports of persecuting minorities, both Muslim and not Christians and others. So these actions are not conducive to Islamic principles, and I am heartened by this, really hurt by this idea that somehow Muslim community, by not speaking out even louder, may be complicit in condoning ISIS. Because those who knows about Islam, those who knows about Islamic beliefs and practices will know that it has absolutely no place for persecution of minorities, innocent people, women, and so on.
Yeah, and Bilal, I mean, welcome to the programme. This is going to overshadow all debate on these issues, isn't it? The practice of these people in Syria and Iraq.
Polarize the debate. What the quote-unquote Islamic State that I like to refer to as the Islamic State militia, well, what they're doing is not, first of all, saying to the people, either accept this khilafah or else you're all sinning. The reality of the situation is that nobody even knew who Abu Bakr Baghdadi looked like up until 2 months ago, let alone what he's actually been doing for the past X amount of years. At least we could say we knew who Osama bin Laden was, we could say we knew who Ayman al-Zawahiri was, and we could say we know who James Cameron was, or David Cameron. We can say we know who these people are, whether you agree with them or not. But for Abu Bakr Baghdadi, who actually knows what he's been doing for the past X amount of years? So therefore, how can the Muslim community at large be realistically asked to support a Khalifa in which they have no idea who he is and what his program is? And if his program is what we've been seeing so far, I think that it would be funny, it would be comedic if these people weren't serious. But with all of the deaths that they've been creating, the mayhem and the chaos that they've been creating, it's obvious that this is not a joke and this is not a bad dream. But the reality of the situation is that none of the other people of authority support them. So therefore, what does the Khilafah actually mean as long as we have a situation where none of the people of authority support them? Then it becomes a source of contention. And what the Khilafah is supposed to be is a unification of the Muslims. It's not supposed to serve where the different Muslim groups now have the swords at each other's throats. And that's what it's serving as right now. Whether people support them or don't support them, that's the reality.
Salman, do you think that we would be better understanding the world and possibly better understanding Islam as well if we detached these people from the religious beliefs that they claim and say, look, there's a group of people here, they've been in a war-torn and destroyed section of the society. In a way, they've been driven mad by the environment in which they're in. They're reacting in this particular way. This is the best way of looking at them, and really the kind of religious justification just can't be taken that seriously.
I mean, of course, any discussion on a rational basis would render this what it actually is. It's a very small minority compared to the actual number of Muslims. They say, 1% of any society, any people, are sociopaths. They are, inclined towards this kind of behavior. And with between 1 and 2 billion Muslims, you're expecting proportionally 1 million or 2 million to be, statistically kind of involved in crime and this type of military, these types of crimes. But what's happening is we're seeing the certain politicians and people in the media who are masters of opportunism jump on this and create some kind of fear over here, thousands of miles away, until we saw this Times newspaper poll of 8 out of 10 Britons fearing Islamic terrorism, when statistically more people die per year from bee stings. This is political opportunism at its height. Trying to stir up fear of the other, fear of this foreign enemy, and saying that they hate us, they want to kill us and commit acts of terrorism. This feeds into this terrorism narrative and this bogus extremism narrative that is designed, in my opinion, to curb our freedoms and our abilities to speak about things frankly. As you mentioned, these people are from war-torn, societies. They've seen atrocities. It's understandable that they might adopt this kind of nihilistic worldview. However, if we zoom out a bit, we're seeing a few thousand, perhaps conservative estimate, out of an ummah in the order of billions of people. So.
Yes, go on.
Yeah, I think one of the problems that we have, there are 3 aspects which I think is missing from this debate. First of all, every coverage seems to suggest that ISIS is having a serious go at minorities, at Shias and others, which implies that the areas which they have taken over are vastly Sunni majority, and the reporting is capable of presupposing that somehow they enjoy legitimacy among the Sunni people in that area. And I don't think that is the case. And I don't think that kind of, framing it in that way, where effectively ISIS is somehow representing the Sunni aspirations, but in a very bad way against the Shias and others, I think that is very unhelpful. And yet, so far, this is what we have seen. The other aspect which is missing, I think, is that, remember, ISIS is coming out of a state or 2 states where the state is absolutely dysfunctional. Any sense of governance and authority is completely dysfunctional. And what happens when you have state which fails? You have opposition armed militia groups which thrives. Now, if you're an opposition armed militia group, you can't have the same kind of discipline and control that a regular army would have. So any group which is notorious, which is the group that can be most horrible and cruel, often prevails for a period of time. And I think this is what has happened in the case of ISIS. Because it's such a monstrous body, it has overtaken all other groups in its cruelty, and as a result others are struggling.
Well, let me just put one of the points that you made to Bilal, because many analysts have made the point that Tala makes there, that the kind of force of the ISIS advance has been driven by a Sunni rising, which isn't politically represented by these ideas. Do you think that ISIS will become isolated when the Sunni rising, which is giving it its current force, departs from it or breaks with it?
Here's the problem that you're looking at. The first issue is that ISIS oppresses everybody. You go back to just like the dictatorships that we continue to see, and we've seen in a lot of the Arab lands. They oppress the minorities. They oppress the other Sunnis. They oppress everyone, and they will oppress both Muslim and non-Muslim. Anyone who does not agree with their methodology and ideology, they become roadkill for them. Now, after having said that, if we're going to focus on are they representative of the Sunni majority, or even in the areas that they're in, I would have to say no. Because even in those areas in Iraq that they are allied with other tribes, the other tribes have not given the bay'ah. The other tribes have not joined ISIS. So even them themselves have not joined. And they've said, I've seen several different interviews on Al Jazeera. Most of them are in Arabic, or I should say all of them are in Arabic. And basically it's been that we will wait until after this Maliki situation is settled, and then we will discuss what this whole Khilafah is all about. So I think it has to be made clear to everybody, and they really have to understand that ISIS is a group that it makes no difference who they come in contact with. Either you will be a part of them or they will oppose you. This is not a Sunni quote-unquote group where it's just like we couldn't really say that Saddam Hussein was a Sunni leader. He was not Shia, but then again, did he represent Sunni Islam? Likewise, with Abu Bakr Baghdadi and the whole ISIS Khilafah situation, can we really say that he is representing Sunni Muslims from around the world, Sunni scholarship, the Sunni majority? Actually, you would be hard-pressed to find anyone outside of their ranks who would come forward and would support what they're doing and how they're doing it.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for on tonight's programme. I want to thank all of my guests and to thank you at home, of course, for watching. Remember, you can keep up with us on our Twitter conversation, or you can follow tonight's stories on our Facebook page as well. For now, we'll have to leave you with some scenes from Pakistan, where thousands took to the streets in Karachi to celebrate the country's Independence Day. But we'll be back tomorrow. Until then, good night.